During my senior year of high school, my friend Sean came to visit from another state. His brother and sister-in-law, my best friend Candace, and I were all hanging out when we decided to drive to the local park. It was dark out, around 8 to 9 p.m. At the entrance of the park is the only skate park in town. It is small, and you can see the whole thing and everything in it when you stand in front, because the place is so well lit. There are no trees or shrubs surrounding it, just flat grass, no hills or any other landscape features. As we're driving by the skate park, my friend Candace and I say, "Pull over." We had never seen the skate park busy at this time of night, and there were so many people there. We were curious as to what was going on. We all get out of the car and are standing together at the front edge of the skate park. When we get a closer look, we notice that we don't recognize a single person there. This makes no sense. We're from a super small town where everyone knows everyone. As we're looking for a familiar face, we finally spot one. It's someone from our school, Dan, who was a skater. He was somewhat of a lone wolf, an odd kid with not that many friends. Tall and lanky, he was always easy to recognize because he often wore the same clothes, red shorts and a gray t-shirt. "Oh, hey, there's Dan," I say and point towards him. We're looking at him as he's rising up in the bowl. Our other group members are chit-chatting with someone at the park, not paying attention to what Candace and I are saying. As we see him, we see someone behind him, following him everywhere he goes. We initially thought it was a person, but as he's coming up from the bowl and starts skating around the edge of the skate park towards us, what we thought was a person behind him is a black, upright, morphing shadow shape that's growing taller and wider and getting closer and closer to Dan until eventually it covers his entire body. And as soon as this thing covers Dan's body, both it and Dan disappear. My friend loses her mind. I had seen a shadow person before, so I was less freaked out than her. She runs up to where Dan was and looks for him, but he was nowhere, just disappeared when we were looking right at him. "Maybe he fell or something," she cried out. Well, there was nowhere he could have fallen that we wouldn't have seen. And we didn't see him fall. One instant he was there and the next he was gone. We didn't talk much on the drive home. We were both in shock. And we never mentioned it to each other again. At school on Monday, I did, however, ask Dan if he was at the skate park last night. He didn't want to answer. "Please, Dan, just tell me." He said yes, but that was all. Still to this day, I have no more answers. I feel like reaching out to him on Facebook or something and sharing the story so I can see what his perspective was, but I guess I'll never know. These are the encounters I've had with these shadow-like entities in the past 2 years. To start, I've never done any hallucinogenic drugs or anything of the sort. I'm in the military and it's way too hard to get away with that stuff to begin with, even if I wanted to. From what I can remember, all of this started happening to me when I was stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma for my military job training. Late one night, I was sleeping in my bunk when I suddenly woke up to what looked like a black figure walking into my room. Wiping the sleep out of my eyes, I sat up, thinking that it was one of the guys on fire guard that night taking head count for the sergeant on CQ. Fire guard is just one of the guys that watches over the barracks during the night to make sure no funny business happens. Just as soon as I sat up to greet the guy walking in, it dissipated into nothingness. Really confused, I looked at the top bunk and saw that my bunkmate was up from his phone screen, lighting up the ceiling. I spoke up and said, "Hey Long, did you see someone walk into our room just now?" He paused and looked down from the top of his bunk at me and said, "Nah man, Fireguard came in like an hour ago. You were knocked out for the night." This time I simply brushed it off and thought it was just a strange encounter and nothing else. Fast forward to January 2018. I started college at the University of North Dakota, UND. This is when the encounters got really bad, to the point where I was too afraid to go to sleep some nights. I lived in a really old dorm building called Squires Hall, way back in the day by myself. The encounters I had didn't all have these shadow people in them, but I'll share what I remember. One night I went to bed and woke up to a tall, shadowy person standing in front of the door of my room with crimson eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I sat up in bed and freaked out. Side note, I don't consider myself a very religious person at all, more like agnostic to clear everything up, so you could imagine my fear seeing these things. After what felt like an eternity, having a staring contest with this entity, I shouted, "What do you want with me?" It took one big step towards me, shook its head, and in a feminine voice it said, "Help." With that, it vanished into the darkness in my room. Another time that really stands out was when it was the end of spring semester, the last week of school. I had most of my room and clothes packed up, and I was ready to move out after my finals were done, and I had a couple of cans of Coke in the back of my mini fridge by the door in my room. One night during that week, I went to bed and woke up to a loud bang. I sat up in my bed and looked towards where the noise came from in my room, towards the door. There, standing in front of my door, was a black figure. It took one step toward me, next to the fridge, and pointed down at it, and then disappeared. I turned on the lamp on my bed and walked over to my fridge, opened it and looked in. There in the back of the fridge, a can of Coke had exploded. An example of the non-shadow people things I see. While I was at UND, I had a long-distance girlfriend over a year. We started dating in high school, and when I enlisted in the military, she started school at the College of St. Scholastica, a private college in Duluth, Minnesota. So at the time that this story begins, we'd been dating for over a year, and everything was great, although she did have a grandfather at the time who was very sick. One night I woke up, and at the foot of my bed I saw three figures. On the right, there stood my girlfriend from the past, a little girl with a silly bob haircut and a pink dress from a photo that I once saw of her. In the middle was my girlfriend from the present, long blonde hair, leggings, and a sweatshirt. Then on the left was my girlfriend from the future. She wore a long black dress as dark as the night, with long black hair. Where her face should have been was just a black messy blur, unlike the other figures beside her. Brushing off the incident, I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't tell her what I saw that night. 2 days later, I got a phone call from her crying. She told me that the grandfather that had been so close to her had passed away, and that she wanted to take a break from our relationship to try to figure everything out. After the call ended, I thought back to what I saw that night and analyzed what that third figure might have been trying to tell me. The black dress might have symbolized death, like the clothes you would wear to a funeral, and the blurry black face, meaning she would break our relationship up when she heard about her grandfather's death. Somehow I had a clairvoyant vision of the near future. Other times I hear people in my room while I'm trying to fall asleep, either people trying to speak to me or talking to someone else in the room. Most of the time, I'll hear people whisper my name in my ear when I'm laying in bed, trying to fall asleep. That summer, I went to see a psychiatrist, just to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. From the sessions I had and the stories I told him, I wasn't schizophrenic, but I was diagnosed with a kind of sleeping disorder. It's called hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations. The hypnagogic is falling asleep and the hypnopompic is waking up. Basically, as I'm falling asleep or coming out of sleep, certain parts of my brain either go to sleep or come out of a sleeping state slower and faster than other parts, making me have these visual and auditory hallucinations. Hearing all of this, I still have my doubts. I don't doubt his credibility or anything like that, but I think that there's more to this than just I'm hallucinating. I'd like to hear what other people think, but I really just don't know. This began when I was very young. I can't pinpoint exactly how young, but I'd assume the first encounter I remember must be from when I was around 6 years old. Max 8, because we had just moved into a new location. I used to spend most of my time as a kid in our basement watching films from a VHS player. The TV upstairs was always on and being used and didn't have any player attached. I'd watch films for hours and hours on end, whatever I found in the cabinet. When it finally became dark outside, which I could see from the very thin windows that were above ground in our basement, I would always start feeling uneasy, as if something was watching me. I remember getting very paranoid. The stairway didn't have lights, so of course it got pitch black. I usually went back upstairs when I got too scared or when I saw them. The shadow people, staring at me through the TV screen, standing behind me. Of course, no one ever was there when I turned around. I just saw them when a movie ended or whatever was playing at the time. This happened very often. I guess one would explain this as some sort of child's imagination, and I wouldn't doubt if it was just my imagination back then. I didn't really think about them for a long time when we moved out of that house. I was around 13 when I had my next encounter. I was home alone, doing whatever on my laptop when I heard a bang from the hallway. I instantly thought that my mom must have come home or one of my siblings did, so I went to check. Instead of seeing one of my family members, I saw a tall, shadowy figure in the hallway. It only lasted for a second, but it scared me to the point that I barricaded myself in my room until my real family came home. I didn't see them for another 3 years that I can remember. We moved again before I went to vocational college in another city. In this new house, a pretty similar event to the last one happened. At this point, I was already in vocational college for safety and security. I just came home from the weekend. Again, my family was elsewhere for the day. Not like it was anything out of the ordinary. I was usually home alone at this point. Knowing that my mom took my siblings to the city, when I heard a coin dropping on our kitchen floor, I could only think of one possible scenario: a burglar. Our back door was never locked. And I mean never. Where was the back door? In our kitchen. With that conclusion, knowing the basics of self-defense, I grabbed a pair of scissors in my room and proceeded out of my room to check to see what was going on after listening for a few minutes for footsteps. I first checked the hallway that was further away from the kitchen, seeing those rooms were possible for me to run into if there was someone. I went and finally peeked into the kitchen. No burglar, just them again. For a second or less, a tall, shadowy figure standing in a reaching position to our cabinet that was open for some reason. It turned its head toward me before disappearing. I stood there in a mild shock for a couple of seconds after the figure was gone. I closed the cabinet, and for the time I was alone. I locked the back door anyway. My next and most recent experience I had with them is from roughly 2 years ago. I had already graduated. In fact, I already worked as a full-time security guard. I lived at home, though. My mom didn't mind it, since she wanted to ensure I could afford living alone when I decided to do so. A similar situation to the previous ones. I'm home alone. How surprising. I was playing on my laptop and I had a headset on, but I usually kept one ear free in case I heard something in the house, like my mom calling me or someone knocking on my door. While I was playing, I heard clear speech from our kitchen and living room area, so I paused the game and took off my headphones. I could still hear it, but not what they were saying. I didn't recognize the voices either. Again, my first thought was that someone broke in. I sneaked to my door to listen more carefully. The talking had stopped at this point, and now I heard footsteps. Clear ones coming toward my room from the hallway. I didn't want to stay and find out if there was someone at this point. My only option was to rush to my window, open it fully, and jump out. The drop was only around 1.6 meters. Once I got out, I rushed to the front yard. No cars besides the couple that were broken and always near our garage. I stood outside for a long while, looking inside from the windows for any movement around the house. I saw nothing at first. Then I looked at my sister's window, which was a room right next to mine, and would you guess it? I saw two of them staring outside of the window straight at me for what felt like forever before they disappeared. I went back in and checked the entire house afterwards, finding nothing else. I turned 21 this year, and I've been a guard for approximately 2.5. I just moved away from home altogether with my old roommate from vocational college. I don't have any other mental illnesses that have been diagnosed besides depression. I'm not really easily frightened or spooked, and I swear, when I walk into the kitchen during the nights to get something to eat or drink, I still feel them watching me. Even when my room and housemate is at home, I know they are following me, and it's only a matter of time before I see them again. I don't fear them, per se. I don't think they want to harm me. I don't think they want to scare me either. I still feel uneasy, and thinking about them makes me uneasy, especially when I have no clue if I'll ever see them again. This story occurred 2 years ago. I wish I'd recorded it, but I was extremely terrified, thinking someone had broken in, so I was in martial arts mode, prepared to defend myself. I was just playing some games on the weekend, enjoying myself, as usual. Nothing out of the ordinary. By the time it was around 1 to 2 p.m., I was walking toward the kitchen and was just gonna eat the leftover Chinese food, until I noticed that my parents' bedroom was open, and the lights in the washroom were on. Then I heard a clink, and felt a chill. I didn't bother, and went to finish my Chinese food, but then I heard another clink. Then I went to grab my katana, which, mind you, is not legal to wield, but I have it in my care as a family heirloom. I go to my parents' bedroom, and I soon start feeling really cold. I check the washroom. My dad's toothbrush cup, which was made of glass, was on the floor on its side, while all the toothbrushes and utensils were still in it. In terms of physics, that's basically impossible. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, my parents' closet shut really hard, and I ran out calling for my uncle to pick me up, to stay at his cottage for a few days until my parents got back. Since then, only shadow people visions in the corner of my eyes. Nothing poltergeist related has ever happened since. First of all, I'll give you a little backstory into my life. Growing up, my grandmother and I would mess around with the paranormal, doing EVPs and such. When I was 13, though, we stopped. My grandma recently started doing it again, and in return, strange things have been happening to me. I work in a nursing home. I've been there for almost a year, and I've never really experienced anything particularly paranormal. I work nights, so there's the occasional creep, but nothing crazy. That was until one evening. I was emptying a catch bag, and the resident's roommate, who was in the hospital at the time, her glass trinket started to make the sound of clanking. I turn around to see the glass trinket fly across the room at me. I calmly walk out, recollect myself, and then go back into the room and pick the object up and put it back where it belongs. Weeks go by and nothing else happens, until one night around 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting at the nurse's station and I hear what sounds like running down the hallway. I jump up and get out of my chair to look down the hall, but nothing. I brush it off as my head playing tricks on me and thought I was suffering from some mild paranoia that night. Well, half an hour goes by, I've calmed down quite a bit, when the attic starts to creak and it sounds like human footsteps are coming from above me. I run down to the other unit to ask if any of the maintenance men have come and are in the attic. They laugh at me and say no, why? And I say, I think someone's up there. The unit nurse tells me that stuff fell out of one of the attic doors, as we have multiple, and one of the items was a mask that you get when you're sick. I then went and looked at every attic door, and they were all closed. There's no ladders leading up to them. I again tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, but to this day I believe someone, alive or dead, was up there. Then one night I was off at home, sleeping, when I recall seeing shadow people walking fast around my room. I don't know if I was awake or asleep, but I felt very much like I was awake and that this was real. They were looking for something. I couldn't move, but I was watching them and thinking, what in the world is going on? Then I was all of a sudden in my grandma's old house, and these shadow people were ripping up the stairs looking for seeds. Then I was in an apartment complex stairwell, and this boy told me to give him my hand, and so I did. He cut into the top section of my finger, and inside me were 3 little white seeds, so he took them. At this point, I woke up and my finger hurt. I then went back to sleep and saw the shadow people again. One of them, this time, touched my back, and I woke up again, and to my back being cold, and to my surprise, my shirt was raised up in the back, and my skin was exposed. I don't know if what we did when I was younger would make them automatically connect to me. I don't know what this all means, but I hope I don't see them again. I've seen the shadow people ever since I was little, when I would see them out of the corner of my eye. Then I'd go to look and nothing was there. I do usually see them long enough to make out some features, though. They're either short or tall, or black or gray. I thought it was just a trick of my mind until one night I was staying over at a friend's place. My friend had 2 cats. I was asleep, and all of a sudden I woke up feeling an intense sense of dread. The cats started freaking out and scratching and meowing at the door. I had stayed over at my friend's place before, and the cats never did that. Then I saw a shadow person by the door. I tried to convince myself it wasn't there and closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them again, the shadow person was standing at the bottom of the bed. This one was completely black. It had no eyes or facial features. It really just looked like a moving shadow. I closed my eyes again, thinking that I was imagining things, and I opened them again, and this time, the shadow person was right over me. At this point, somehow the cats got through the door, even though I thought I had locked it, and chased the shadow person out the window that was above the headboard of the bed. I say chase because I'm not really sure if they scared it or if it just left. As soon as it left, so did the dread that I was feeling. My friend's cats hated me after that, and would always hiss at me when I tried to pet them, before they left me. I would have considered it as a sleep paralysis episode, even though I've never had one before, except for the cats reacting the way they did. I've never experienced something like that since, but I do see them occasionally. I have a really awful feeling about this. Lately my visual snow has been acting up. I've been getting awful ringing in my ears, and I've started seeing the shadow people again. All usually happens before something awful happens, or just when it's over, but tonight was so much worse. I've seen the shadow people since I was little, but today they absolutely lined the roads, in groups. Even my dog growled at them, and he never growls at anything. On my way home, there were entire groups of like 20 of them that I would see running along the side of the car. Tonight also was the first time that I've been physically affected by them. I saw one staring down at me from about 100 feet away while I walked to my car, and I started to get really dizzy and nauseous. After I got home, an incredibly clear one was walking on the sidewalk parallel to mine, and after seeing it, I could barely walk straight. I don't know what's going on, but I have a really bad feeling about this. I moved to Fairhaven, Michigan when I was about 4. I remember explicitly walking into the big blue house on the corner of a street called Sunnyside with my father. It seemed huge compared to the cramped apartment we had moved away from. This tiny town was located right off Anchor Bay, which is a part of the St. Lawrence Seaway. This means that the land these quaint homes were built on was very old, with more history than my 4-year-old mind could comprehend. Not long after we moved in, after my sister and I were tucked in for the night, we began to hear disembodied whistling. It wasn't scary, eerie whistling, but rather jovial, upbeat whistling. At first we thought it was a neighbor, our parents, somebody else, but after a while we realized that it wasn't. I can vividly recall playing in my room with my sister one morning and watching plainly as one of our toy planes rolled on the carpet across the floor. I can also recall my mother, as I ran to tell her, telling me to quit making up stories, but my sister had seen it too. After that, though, we kept our experiences to ourselves. That's why I've never mentioned the shadow people. My mother always used to shut my door after she put us to bed. That's why when I woke up in the dead of night to see it ajar, I was confused. I sat up, squinting in the darkness to see why my door had been left open, and that was when I saw it. A shadow, rather 2 shadows, distinctly defined, moving towards me. They had no face, no eyes, only the outline of 2 dark people things, moving almost as if they were in slow motion or underwater. I hid under the covers until morning. What's weird is I can remember being on the school bus and casually talking about the shadow people to a fellow classmate. They never really gave me any guff or reacted weirdly. Does that mean that they saw them too? Let me give you some background. When my family moved to our newly built house, we started hearing noises upstairs which started out as creaks and small bangs but turned into footsteps and loud bangs and doors slamming. My mom's side is sensitive to ghosts, and it didn't seem to be that until one day I saw a man in all black with a hat and trench coat staring at me from around the corner. I thought it was a ghost at first, but I was about 8 years old and was already used to seeing these types of things and had talked about it before with my mom. One day he was standing there and I asked my mom if she could see him. And she turned and was like, "Oh, yep, there he is, hey Fred," to try to make it more lighthearted to my younger sister, who turned around and saw him as well. It became a joke that his name was Fred, and we let him be because he never caused any harm or showed any intent. We continued to see him around and hear his noises until we moved about 4 years later. At the house my family lives in now, I still saw him, but my mom no longer did, and my sister saw him occasionally, but only ever in front of my bedroom door or in my room if it was open and I wasn't in there. At our new house, his feeling changed to me, and it became more and more mean and malevolent, to the point where I freaked out at 3 a.m. and used chapstick to put crosses on the entrance to my room. I was 15, don't judge. At that point, he didn't enter my room, but stood outside my door or in my closet, and I could feel him and his bad energy through it. My sister still reported just seeing him standing there and not bothering her. About 2 years ago is when I read about shadow people, and I think that maybe that's what he is. It's the same figure, never any different kind of person. 2 years ago, I moved out with my fiancé, who I think the shadow man really doesn't like. And I still see him in the 3 different places we've lived, and my sister no longer sees him in my parents' house or anywhere else. I don't specifically believe in God, but my fiancé does, and we have some crosses, which seem to keep the shadow man out of our bedroom, but I can still feel him at the door, Once I leave, I can see him or feel him watching or following me outside. Lately, I've been seeing small shadows when I'm outside and at work, and I'm not sure if that's him trying to trick me into thinking there's an animal and trying to follow it or something, but I just don't know. I don't know if this is even a shadow person or if it's something worse, and for the record, I've never used Ouija boards or anything paranormal that could upset the other side. I have some crystals, and I'm looking into some new ones if that helps, but maybe I should sage the house. I've tried ignoring him, asking him what he needs, and telling him to leave, but nothing works. I don't know who he is, or what he wants. I used to see shadow people when I was younger. My father lives right next to a graveyard, and there's a street from it down towards the house. When I was like 5 to 6 years old, I used to sit on my couch and look out towards the graveyard. I would often see dark figures floating down the street quickly towards our house. Most dark figures would wear a cloak as they floated. I would see them float towards our house at least twice a week. I don't really remember if I told my parents about the dark figures or not. Sometimes I would get scared if I quickly looked out and saw them coming, but sometimes they would just fade and start floating down. Later on, my mother moved into an apartment when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. We had a long hallway leading from the entrance door down to my room. In the hallway, there were doors to other rooms, such as the kitchen, her room, the living room, and the bathroom. After a few years of living in that apartment, I started to see shadow creatures at the corner of my eye. I could see the whole hallway if I just looked a little bit to my side. First, they would appear near the entrance door, but soon, with time, they would move closer and closer to my room, until eventually they would stand by the door and peek into my room as I was sitting there. We have now moved into a newer apartment, and now I'm almost an adult. I've stopped seeing the shadow figures around my dad's house, and I no longer see shadow people in my apartment ever since we moved out, but sometimes as I am in my new room playing video games, I can see in the corner of my eye a cat-looking dark creature walk past me. I used to have a cat when I was 5, but it's long dead. It disappears as soon as I turn my head to look at it. I see it about twice a month. This is my experience with shadow creatures. I just wish I knew what they were. I'm already aware that my house is haunted. I'm not scared of it, but I am used to it. I've captured many EVPs in my home, but it still gives me the chills whenever I witness a shadow person. I'm a gamer, and I was up late last night until about 3:15 in the morning gaming with my buddies. I was playing some Fortnite on the Xbox, when just out of the blue, at around 3 a.m., I see this black shadow move super quick out of the corner of my eye into my room. Now you have to remember, my lights were off, and this shadow was black enough to catch my attention with the blinds shut on the second story of my house. No car lights would have been able to produce a black shadow deep enough and dark enough to catch my attention while gaming. When I noticed this, I swore and jumped out of my chair. It was only for about 10 to 15 seconds, but then it just disappeared. It drives me crazy that they're only ever out of the corner of your eye. Also, I have captured more than my fair share of EVPs at 2:58 to 3 o'clock in the morning, but I've never been able to catch an EVP from them. I wish they had something to say. I think I was 12 the first time this happened, and the other instances that this happened was when I was in the 8th grade, so 13 or 14. So the first time I was in church because they were celebrating Mother's Day. I had on a red dress and black shoes with my hair down. It was a very short experience, but I saw someone walk through the wall in front of me when I was looking at it. But it wasn't just someone. It looked like me. It had the same red dress and the same black shoes, and it looked like I had walked through the wall. This isn't really related, but once everyone went outside to hit the piñata, I went back inside to get something to drink and I heard someone laughing. It sounded more like a cackle. I searched to see if anyone was there, but no one was inside the church, so I immediately ran outside. The second time this happened to me was when I was in the 8th grade, and it wasn't just me who saw these spirits, but my brother and dad also. The difference was, these spirits were actually shadow people, and not like the first time when I saw the entity in color. Anyway, my dad one day told us that when he was home alone, he saw my brother walk through the second living room door and walk around the living room. Seeing that, my dad immediately thought he was home, and thought nothing much of it. An hour or so later, my brother opened the door and walked into the living room, so what my dad saw wasn't my brother. He also told us that when he was home alone again, he was in the kitchen cooking something. When you're in the kitchen, you can see the living room and the living room door in my house. Well, anyway, he was cooking, and he sees me walk through the main living room door. He said I just continued walking down the hallway and disappeared into my room on the left of the hall. I was at school at the time, so this couldn't have been me, and he was home alone at the time. I also saw my dad's shadowy figure. It was in the morning, and I was in my room. I think it was around 6 a.m., so I was getting ready for school at the time. I opened my door and poked my head out to see if my dad was awake yet, because I didn't want him to yell at me for being late. My room is down a long hallway, and it's the last room on the left. The hallway leads straight to the living room and the living room door. When I poked my head out, I saw my dad looking through the transparent door as he always does in the morning. I finished getting dressed because I didn't want to get yelled at, and started making my way out. I was walking down the hallway fully expecting my dad to be there, but he wasn't. In fact, as I was walking, I heard my dad snoring in his room. His room is across from mine, so I could clearly hear him snoring. There was no one in the living room, so I just left to go to school. My mom didn't see any of this, and we didn't see a shadow figure that looked like her either, but she did tell me that something odd happened minutes after I had left for school that day. My headphones were on her dresser, and they fell down by themselves. She didn't think much of it and tried to attribute it to something else, but then she heard me yell, "Mom!" repeatedly. Also, I'm not sure if this is related, but my dad died in the same year that we saw all these entities, so could they have been a sign or a bad omen? Are they shadow people or doppelgangers, or both? After he died, he started sort of visiting us and haunting us as well. I don't know what these things were, but I think they bring bad things, and I hope I don't see them again. Okay, so about a year and a half ago, I woke up in the middle of the night at like 2 or 3 in the morning. I had this feeling of dread or anxiety, and my bed was surrounded by these really tall, really skinny shadow people. I've researched shadow people a bit, and I'm not sure what they are. Can anyone shed some light on what these things are, and what they want with me? So this encounter happened to me on Tuesday, and I'm only telling this now because it was such a radical experience. I need to review exactly what I experienced in my head, and writing seems to be a good way to do that. For what it's worth, this happened on the night of a full moon as well, and this full moon was so bright I couldn't even get to sleep the entire night since the light was shining through my blinds. That's how bright it was. Anyway, I was just staying awake, trying to fall asleep, and I was just staring towards the corner of my room where my laptop desk is. I noticed a light under my desk which caught my attention immediately, as I don't have anything reflective over there that should shine in the dark. And the only thing that's over there is the power cable. This light was right on it the whole time. I couldn't figure out why a light would be there in such a concentrated area. Then, like almost immediately, as soon as I was going to get up and check it out, the light rushed towards me. And since it was a full moon that night, I did notice that this light had a dark, misty type substance around it that was darker than my room, without my light on and blind shut, but still very noticeable though due to the moon's light illuminating it. I only had my arm out and it went right up and started circling my head, so I just lay back down memorizing every detail of this thing as the dark, misty substance was circling my head with that light that I saw earlier in the center of it. It quickly disappeared, but the hair on the back of my arms and neck immediately stood straight up and stayed that way for most of the night. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I've seen shadow people before in my house, but I've never seen anything like this. A dark mist with a light in the middle? I feel like it was draining power from my laptop. I've caught orbs on tape before in my house, around my electronic devices that are plugged into the wall. Also, another interesting fact is I got tired while watching this thing, almost like a Sandman type of entity, so I wonder if it was draining my energy too. I wasn't afraid of this thing, really, I was just curious. And if it was a shadow person, they only appear to people out of the corner of their eye and bolt as soon as you take notice of them, making you question what you saw, but this thing had the appearance of a shadow person and light orb at the same time, but it didn't run. I was staring right at it, and it came at me the moment I decided to go check it out. Is this their true form? Does anyone else know what I'm talking about? Maybe that's what they really are, a combination of shadows and light, but we only see them as shadows. I don't know what I saw, but I wish I did. I've witnessed shadow people before in my house, but it's always just before I fall asleep or when I'm super tired. Tonight, though, a shadow person revealed itself to me in front of my eyes, and not out of the corner like most sightings. I was watching TV with the Christmas lights and the kitchen lights on at about 11 o'clock at night. There were no cars and nothing outside. I noticed the shadows acting weird from my kitchen, and I saw a quick flash of light turn into a full-fledged shadow person, being visible on my dining room ceiling with a reddish color around it, but it was completely black. I had my phone next to me, but I felt like if I tried to take a picture of it, it would just disappear. So I just decided to observe it, since it was shocking to see a full-fledged shadow person in front of me, completely aware of my surroundings and wide awake. And what's weird is, I thought I noticed it waving at me, like it knew that I was aware of it. I've been convinced my house is haunted for a while now, as I've captured over 1,000 EVP recordings in my home and recently recorded orbs on camera after I noticed them buzzing around me like little insects. But once again, I've only seen shadow people in my house just before I fall asleep, so I always just discounted those sightings as sleep hallucinations. But this time, I was fully awake and aware. Maybe it wanted to be seen. I don't think I want to know why. This happened a few months ago, and it was the most terrifying night of my life. My son is 2, and occasionally he hops into bed with me in the middle of the night. It was about midnight when I get hit with sleep paralysis. I'm fully aware of my surroundings, but I cannot move or scream. I'm sleeping on my back, and I can see my son next to me, asleep. In the doorway to my right, I see this shadow. Definitely a human figure, but he's wearing a cloak with a hood over his head. He was so dark, I couldn't see his face. He slowly floats to the right side of the bed where my son is sleeping and just stands there, inches away from him, watching him. I begin to panic and struggle with every ounce of my being to throw myself over my son to protect him, but I'm unable to. My body felt so heavy, and I felt so weak. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. It felt like an eternity of struggle when my son started to cry. The figure disappeared, and I snapped out of it. I got my son back to sleep and calmed myself down enough to get out of bed and make sure there was no one in our house. I found nothing, so I hopped back in bed and fell asleep. An hour later, I'm hit again with sleep paralysis. Immediately, I look to the door, and there he is again. This time, he floats over to the foot of the bed and waits there for a second. He then gets on the bed and is right at my son's feet, sitting there, watching him. I struggle to move or scream, but I can't. Shadow Man turns his head in my direction, and almost immediately my son starts crying. The Shadow Man disappears. I get him back to sleep and hold him in my arms, and eventually fell asleep once more. 2 hours later, now it's about 4 o'clock in the morning, another round of sleep paralysis hits me. This time I know what's coming. My son is still in my arms, asleep, but I feel ready and calm. But this time, I see the Shadow Man and 2 other figures in the opposite corner of the room. They're conversing with each other, but I can't hear them. 2 of them disappear, and the Shadow Man stands there for a second. Then he comes flying at me, full speed. He shoves me off the bed, and I swear I felt his hands on me with incredible force. My son starts crying, I'm fully awake in a panic, and the Shadow Man is gone. I gave up on sleep for the rest of that night. My son fell asleep on my lap, and I just sat there with the bedside lamp on. 4 months later, and I haven't had any more encounters, but have since gotten sleep paralysis more frequently. But man, I've never in my life felt more terrified and desperate than I did that night. I don't know if he had bad intentions towards my son, but he definitely didn't like my trying to interfere with whatever he was doing or trying to do. When I was a child, under 5 years old, I remember playing a game with the entity known as the Hat Man. As I grew older, I used to play it for fun without the Hat Man, so I assumed that I made it up, but looking back on it, I can't see why I would create this, and I can't see why I would create the rules that it had. The Hat Man, a tall shadow person with broad shoulders and a large frame, wearing a fedora and trench coat, would be outside, and the game was in play. Once the game started, if I went outside, I knew it to be dangerous territory and I would be unsafe. If I stayed inside, it was just a fun game for both of us. It was basically just a game of hide and seek. I would crawl beneath the windows and pop my head out to search for him and frantically pop back down and scurry around beneath the windows. It was such a thrill, and I enjoyed playing it, and so did the Hat Man. It was understood by me that if I stepped foot outside during the game, he would hurt me. He never lured me outside or tried to convince me to go outside, and I think he enjoyed playing with me like an adult would with a kid. Just in this case, it was a shadow entity playing a game with a human child. But it was still understood and respected by both of us that I should stay inside during the game, and the rules were that if I did go outside, he would hurt me. It was nothing personal, it was just the rules. There is the possibility that I made the game up entirely on my own, although I suspect it was real because I didn't learn about shadow people until I was a teenager. And then I found out that the Hat Man was a real thing and was commonly seen. It was only then that I thought back to my game and considered the possibility that maybe I didn't make it up at all. And then those creepy rules. I wasn't a violent child and I didn't experience any trauma that I'm aware of. I was happy and curious and playful. I didn't see the Hat Man again after we moved house when I was 6. I ended up introducing the game to my younger siblings, but we just pretended that someone was out there. Have you ever played a game with the shadow person? Are these things known to take an interest in kids? I wonder how many other children he's playing games with. Last night on Coast to Coast AM, I was listening to them talk about shadow people and the Hat Man. The top hat, the old clothing, the watch. It was all there. Let me explain. I was somewhere around 8 to 10 years old. My bedroom was on the side street, and my house was on the corner. Every time a car would drive by, the lights would hit my closet door through the window. I remember trying to sleep, and I heard a car drive by, and that's when I looked over and saw a black figure walk by the bedroom window outside with a wide-brimmed hat. It scared me to death. I eventually fell back asleep. Later that night, I woke up randomly for no reason. What I saw was the same guy, but this time he was standing in my doorway. He had a wide-brimmed top hat, trench coat, an old watch, and a briefcase. As soon as I noticed him, all my hairs stood up on end. He turned around slowly and walked through the door across the hall into my sister's room. I haven't thought about this story in over 15 years, but when I heard that episode last night, it triggered me, and I just remembered every single detail. I wonder what he wants. I wonder what he is. When I was younger, I used to see this shadow man in my doorway almost every single night. I have always had sleeping issues, so when I would wake up in the middle of the night, I could see a figure, darker than the dark, darker than everything else around it, standing in my doorway. He would never come in, but he would kind of peek around the corner, switching from hiding right out of view and then allowing half of his body to be seen. I was around 7 or 8 at the time, and this went on for probably around a year. He was taller and thinner than my dad, so I know it wasn't him. As an adult, I have tried to explain this and found shadow people. However, this guy didn't have a hat, and I don't think he was mean. At first he scared me, but eventually I got used to him. I also want to note that I didn't see him out of the corner of my eye. I would stare dead at him for like 15 to 20 minutes at a time as he rocked from hiding to peeking, hiding to peeking. I also wasn't in sleep paralysis because I could move and sit up at will. Soon after I started seeing this man, I would also wake up and hear someone calling me, but it wasn't a voice, it was kind of like a whisper yell, if that makes sense, so I couldn't tell who it was. At first, I thought it was my mom, so I went to her room, but when I did, everybody would be asleep. And that would happen about once a week, and I would get up out of bed and try to follow it where I thought it was leading me. One time I was led to the living room, where I would stand for like 20 minutes just waiting to hear this voice again. When I didn't hear it, I'd go back to my room. It's kind of funny that it didn't scare me back then, because looking back at it, it's pretty weird. Back in middle school, there was a windstorm that took out a lot of my town's power for a period of about a week or so. Because electricity did not work, school was also canceled for a bit, and during the nighttime, my family and I would just go to bed early and use flashlights and candles to light things up. During one of these nights, I woke up, and for some reason I had a gut feeling to look at the doorway to my room, which I always kept open. Suddenly, a tall figure moved into the doorway and stood still. Its arms were unproportionately long and were waving around, kind of like when you view something in a pool, how it appears to move around. By this time I was wide awake because of terror, which had taken the best of me. The figure looked basically two-dimensional and completely black. I stared back at it for what felt like forever since I didn't want to look away, and I was terrified. At one point, I even shouted, "Go away! Leave me alone!" Eventually, I grabbed a flashlight. I kept it right next to my bedside table since a lamp didn't work, and I shone it at the doorway, and it was gone. Cliché, I know, but that's what happened. I turned the flashlight off and it was still gone, but I spent the rest of that entire night awake and terrified. I still can't explain it. Was it a hallucination? It definitely wasn't a dream, because seeing the figure appeared to put me in a bit of shell-shock state, and I was definitely awake. An interesting thing to note is that this was during the whole Slender Man fad that was going on, so that's what it looked like to me. Also, I sometimes hear about shadow people, but to me that's kind of a fad. I don't know if this experience is something real, if shadow people are real, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Either way, I don't know how to explain it. These are two separate experiences that come together into one larger event. One day, I was home with my mom, just hanging out in the living room watching TV. My mom got a phone call, and I watched her go upstairs. Like, I literally watched her go up the stairs. A couple of minutes later, I went upstairs to ask her a question, but she wasn't up there. I looked all around the house and eventually found her sitting on the porch, still on the phone. I asked her if she had gone upstairs, and she looked at me like I was crazy, and she said that she hadn't been upstairs all day. A couple of weeks later, I was sitting on my bed using my laptop when my mom was getting ready for bed. I looked up and saw my mom standing in my doorway in a white nightgown, and she sleeps in one just like it. Her hair was all messed up. She didn't say anything, she just looked at me, and I looked back down at my laptop, and when I looked back up, she was gone. I thought she had just gone to her room. I heard something in the bathroom, so I went to check it out, and she was right there in front of the mirror, taking off her makeup with her hair still fixed from earlier that day and in her normal clothes. No nightgown. I asked her how she had changed so fast. She looked at me again like I was crazy. About a month later, my parents got in a car accident where the truck they were in flipped 3.5 times, and my mom's side almost got T-boned by a semi-truck. According to some people, what I saw was my mom's doppelganger. And when someone sees a doppelganger, it means something bad is going to happen to the person that the doppelganger looks like. A few years ago, I owned a recording studio in Rock Springs, Wyoming, in the basement of the old Woolworths building. My brother-in-law ran a snowboard shop up on the main floor, and the basement had a room that I used to record musicians in. This whole basement couldn't be kept lit. I would buy light bulbs every week to replace the ones that had popped. One room would stay somewhat lit, so I set up shop there. There were many experiences we had that were completely unexplainable, but one stands out above the others. I had just finished recording a band that evening, and they got all packed up and left. I locked the door behind them and watched them drive away. Going back down to the studio in the basement, I went to start mixing the audio. About 20 minutes into the process, I stopped the music for just a second to adjust some things, and I heard running down the stairs into the basement, and then frantic running down the hallway toward my room. I had left the door open. I looked down the hallway to see what was going on, but there was absolutely nothing there. I was quite freaked out, but I really needed to get the mixes done, so I went back to work and tried hard to concentrate on the music. About 5 minutes later, the exact same thing happened, except this time I ran to the hallway to catch the sound of the noise. So there I am, staring down this dark hallway, hearing something frantically running towards me, and I can't see anything. I checked the entire basement, which scared the crap out of me because there was only one light that was still working. The rest of the basement, I found nothing and no one. I went and checked the door upstairs. It was locked. I went back to the studio and decided to put on some headphones to keep the creepiness out. Well, that didn't work at all because as I was mixing, I could feel a horribly angry presence behind me. In my mind, I could see exactly what the presence looked like. It was a very angry, bald Asian man, about 40. I kept looking behind me, but there was nothing there that I could see with the naked eye. Soon the man felt like he was standing right over me. His fists were clenched and up over his head like he was going to hit me. I turned around and saw a door down the hallway close on its own. And that was it. I was out. I packed up my studio the next week and I never went back. After studying a little bit more about the history of the area, come to find out there was what was dubbed the Chinese Massacre on the same street some 100 years ago. There were a lot of Chinese railway workers there who were killed by local folks for taking their jobs. No wonder he was so angry. I have several stories of Mexico. It's a place of many myths and legends. This one is one a friend of mine recounted to me about his uncle and his friend who were stuck in a horrifying circumstance. So my buddy's uncle and his friend were headed home on a highway one night years ago in the state of Oaxaca. You see, they rode in one of those old flatbed trucks that are used to put whatever vegetables or fruits might have been picked that day. They were farmers, as were most of the people in the area. It was very rural at the time, and they had only just had a highway installed that was made of actual concrete. As they were returning home, the uncle noticed something in the rearview mirror and made out what seemed to be a horse, about 150 feet away. He couldn't really make out the horse's features and didn't think anything of it until he drifted off to sleep in the passenger seat. As he slept, the uncle had a small nightmare of a horse with large black eyes running up to his passenger side and startling him awake. He did wake up with a start and gathered his bearings. He shook it off, thinking it was just a dream. But then he looked over to his buddy that was driving with a terrified look on his face. They were going about 50 miles an hour at the time, which was pretty fast for a truck that size. He said, "What are you driving so fast for?" And the friend responded by saying that they were being followed. He said that for the past couple of miles, the horse in the rear view was slowly inching its way closer and closer to the vehicle. Well, that's when the panic began to settle in, and they both felt immense fear wash over them. They sped up to about 65 to try to get away, but the clanking of the hooves of this horse slowly kept getting louder and louder behind them. The one driving said not to turn around and look anymore, to just look straight ahead and not look at the horse, because it seemed to gain on them whenever they glanced back at it. The uncle closed his eyes in fear, only listening, and when the hooves inched closer and closer, he glanced to the side of the window. There he saw the large black eyes of the horse from his dream, in real life, looking directly at his friend from the passenger side as it had caught up now. The uncle screamed for his friend not to look and to just go straight and drive fast, because the horse had a fixated gaze on him. They sped up, and all they could, and still the horse kept a swift pace, still staring at the driver. When he finally glanced over, he began to cry, overwhelmed with emotion and panic, when the horse suddenly began to slow down. And as it did, the uncle saw that in the rear view once more, except this time it had no legs. It was just standing in the road, floating, staring at them with its huge black eyes. They told the grandfather of the man driving when they arrived home what they had witnessed, and he told them that the road that was built there had gone straight through sacred territory, and they had been lucky to drive past the area at this time of night, because everyone said that they had felt the ground there was salado, or salted, meaning it was washed with bad energy. I was a nurse for close to 40 years and have had a number of experiences. Here's one of them. I was maybe 24 or 25 at the time and worked for a private Catholic hospital in Auckland, New Zealand that was over 100 years old. My shift of preference was the night shift, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., as I didn't have to deal with all the political crap that goes on in the hospitals during the day. The hospital was run by nuns of the Mercy Order that originated in Ireland. These nuns kept a close eye out on how the wards were run and operated, and it was not uncommon to see them in their habits, checking on how things were going any time of the day or night. They were extremely strict, but did care about their patients deeply. Originally, the hospital had been a free hospital, but at some stage it became private and catered to those who could afford to use their services, which actually in New Zealand is not too much of an issue as we have free public hospital system there. Where I did my training and where I worked for most of my nursing career, that was the case anyway. Anyway, on the ward that I was working on at that time, I was sole charge late at night, with a supervisor who would pop in when I needed her to check on medications for patients, or to help if I needed it. I rarely saw anyone during the night, apart, as I mentioned before, from the supervisor or the odd nun who would pop in to make sure everything was okay. This one night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I was in the sluice room, emptying a bedpan of one of the patients. Now, the sluice sink is only a few feet from the door, and as I stand there facing the sink, the door is to my left-hand side. Obviously, due to the noise that's made in sluice rooms, I always made sure that the door to the sluice room was firmly shut before I started to do any work in there, so as to cause the least amount of disturbance to the patients who were trying to sleep. So I'm standing at the sink, rinsing the metal bedpan before putting it into the sterilizer, when out of the corner of my eye, I suddenly saw a tall nun standing in front of the sluice room door. She was tall, thin, wearing an old-fashioned habit, all black, barring the white bit around her face. She had her hands clasped in front of her, and I got a sense of slight disapproval from her. She looked to be in her 40s, perhaps. All of this from out of the corner of my eye. My thought was perhaps I was being a bit noisier than I thought I was, and she was about to let me have it. I admit I did jump because I didn't hear her enter, but put it down to concentrating on what I was doing. So a couple of seconds after I became aware of her, I finished what I was doing and I turned to face her, but to my utter shock, there was no one standing there. The door was firmly closed, and there's no way she could have left the room without the door being opened, and I would have heard it. I admit I stood there for a couple of minutes so my heart rate could slow down and my breathing could return to normal. I put it down to one of the old nuns who had passed, just checking up on the staff to make sure they were doing their job properly. I couldn't actually ask any staff if they had seen anyone before in that area of the hospital, as it really wasn't the sort of place where talking about ghosts was accepted. I was only young and didn't have the self-confidence that I have these days, but I still don't know how she could have gotten in and out without me hearing her. So when I was little, my stepdad used to work the night shift at a gas station on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada, in a nice part of town, off the highway, right before you head up to the Sierra Nevadas and Lake Tahoe. The area back then was fairly new, and the Shell gas station was really nice. My stepdad never had any problems working the night shift, though he did tell me some interesting characters would come in, and he often had regulars that he became friends with. My stepdad was the only one in the shop when he worked the night shift, and he was always told about the ghost that liked to pester the other workers, like turn off the lights, or open or close the bathroom door, knock snacks off the shelf, the works. My stepdad, being the massive skeptic that he is, didn't believe any of these stories, and because nothing ever happened to him, he just brushed them off. Until one night. My stepdad is working one of the night shifts, and it's pretty quiet. He hasn't had many customers coming through other than for gas, and since it's a pay-at-the-pump kind of thing, no one comes into the store. So my stepdad is playing on his phone and frequently glances up at the doors or at the security monitor to see if anyone's coming, but the station is deserted. He turns his attention back to his game when he hears the electronic sliding doors open and the sound of the bell above the door going off. My stepdad puts his phone down and looks up to greet the customer, but he doesn't see anyone. He calls out, but no one answers. He glances at the security camera, but he doesn't see anyone else in the shop other than him, and there are no cars at the station or in the parking lot. He gets a little weirded out since the doors have sensors and the only time they open is if they sense someone approaching them, but he just chalks it up to a prank or some sort of malfunction and gets back to his game. "Hello." He hears the voice as clear as day right in front of him, and his head immediately snaps up to speak to the customer that he clearly did not see before. There's no one there. He's even more weirded out, but convinces himself that he was either imagining things or that the sound somehow came from his phone or the radio. And then he hears the screams. He said the sound of the woman screaming came out of nowhere, and that the screams were so loud and so chilling he jumped and actually dropped his phone. My stepdad is a pretty big guy, about 6'2" and a little hefty, and he doesn't normally get scared over anything, but he said the screaming terrified him so much that he couldn't think straight. He ran out from behind the counter and checked the aisles, but no one was in there. He checked the bathrooms and maintenance closet, and no one was in there. But the screams were still going, and they were deafeningly loud. So he thinks, well, maybe there's a woman outside who might be hurt or being attacked. He runs outside to where he thinks the screaming woman is, and there's no one. The lot is empty. There are no people, no cars, nothing. He checks around the back of the store and does a loop, but he can't find the source of the screaming, and just as suddenly as the screaming had started, it stopped. He goes back inside and checks the security tapes to see if he's missing something, but other than him running inside and outside of the store like an idiot, he doesn't see anything else, and he's completely unsure of what to think. The next day, as he's leaving work and his coworker takes over, he tells them about what happened, brushing it off as just some weird prank. But the coworker's response was very different. And even though my stepdad doesn't believe in any sort of paranormal activity, the words stuck with him. The coworker looked up at him and said, "Oh, so you've heard her too." This happened to me recently, and it confirms to me at least that our house is haunted. We've had some questionable experiences living here, but to me, this one's a no-brainer. I was walking through the hallway and down the stairs to get to the kitchen, empty thermos in hand, acquiring some water for my girlfriend and myself. When I got to the kitchen, I heard someone coming down the stairs behind me. Knowing people were home, I thought nothing of it. Continuing toward the sink, I turned to see who it was. When I got to the sink and had turned all the way around, the prominent footsteps faced me and stopped at the bottom of the stairs, but nobody was there. I stood there for a second, wondering if something would appear or walk back up the stairs or something, but nothing. So I filled up the bottle and went back upstairs. My girlfriend and I moved to a new apartment about 6 months ago. From the first night we moved in, I noticed weird things in the corner of my eye. I see what looks like dark static-like figures in our hallway and bathroom. Sometimes the figures move, but they mostly look like they're standing still. I never see them fully, only out of the corner of my eye. When I turn to look, they vanish. We have a cat and a dog who have both acted strangely when it comes to the bathroom. My dog demands to be with me, and if I don't let him, he freaks out, which is something he's never done before moving here. Additionally, our cat will sit in the dark bathroom for hours, also something that has never happened before. There have been so many times where my dog will start growling or barking at the hall or the bathroom, but I never see anything there. Whatever it is, it usually doesn't do anything physically, except for one time. I had a migraine, so I was sitting in a hot shower with the lights off. Suddenly the cabinet door under the sink opened and then slammed shut. When I looked at it, expecting to find the cat or dog, there was nothing. I was alone, and that was several months ago, and that's the only time something physical has ever happened. I told my girlfriend about it and she agreed that the apartment has a weird vibe that she has not seen, the staticky shadow figures. Does anyone know what they are and what they want? One night I was home alone. I had just gotten out of the shower and I went to my room and started painting my nails. About 20 minutes later, I heard a woman say, "She's in the bathroom." We've had a woman appear in our house often since we bought it. About 5 minutes after I heard that, I looked up from painting my nails and saw a little face about 3 feet off the ground looking at me and smiling. All I could see of the face was little black eyes and a little smile. What makes this experience so creepy is knowing that they had been watching me and keeping tabs on me. I wonder what she wanted with me. This happened about a year ago in the apartment that I used to live in. The front door locked automatically, and one night I locked myself out, so I called the locksmith, and eventually he arrived and let me in. For whatever reason, this company only accepted cash or credit, and all I had was debit. So we're kind of stuck, and while we're figuring out what to do, he asks to use the bathroom. When he came out, he looked like a completely different person. It kind of took a second to sink in, and I didn't know what to make of it. I offered him a piece of cake to make up for the payment delay, to which he replies, "You're a funny lady." At this point, he goes into the spare bedroom, all his tools and everything in hand, and I hear this crack. I go look in the room, and he's gone. I checked the whole apartment, and he was nowhere to be found. I distinctly remember him going into that room, and he couldn't have left either. If he went through the front or the back door, I would have heard him. I lived on the 3rd floor, so it's not like he jumped out the window. The locksmith company never followed up, so I guess thanks to the miscellaneous wizard who saved me $150? So my wife and I rent out the downstairs of an old duplex in a small town. If I had to guess, I'd say the house was probably built in or around the 1920s. So last night my wife and I were watching Hulu and she paused our show to go to the restroom. And right as she gets back, before we start the show again, our Amazon Echo says, "You whispered to me. Did you want to activate whisper mode?" I didn't know there was a whisper mode, but neither did my wife. And neither of us said anything, so we just kind of looked at each other for a second. Then Alexa says, "That was so polite. I would be more than happy to help you. How can I help?" We just kind of nervously laughed about it and went back to our show. Before I got in bed later, I checked the Echo app to see what it heard. Apparently it heard, "Alexa, please help." Now, I'm not saying a spirit or whatever is using my Amazon Echo, but it creeped me out because I know prior to her saying that there was very minimal noise. It's picked up on noises from the TV before, but like I said, it was muted at the time. I want to say I lived in this house 8 or 9 years ago. I was a senior in high school, and I'm 25 now. I honestly don't think my sisters or parents knew about this man hanging himself on the front porch of our house until after the experience that my sister and I had. And let me give you some backstory. My sister could see ghosts, and I, on the other hand, have seen ghosts of people that I knew, but my sister was on another level. She could see ghosts of people we didn't know and talk to them. One night, it was kind of late, maybe 11 or 12-ish, I don't quite remember. We were looking outside the window, and my sister kept saying that she saw a man at the fence line. My parents looked and couldn't see anything, so they didn't really have any concern as they thought she was just trying to scare everybody. We continue to go on with our night when my sister keeps looking out the window and sees him again. She gets up, opens the door, and begins to walk outside. My friend and her friend and I, who were all staying there together that night, followed her out. She goes to the exact spot where she kept saying that she had seen him and begins talking. She finds out his name and what happened and asks if he will show himself to me so that I would believe her. It's not that I didn't believe her, because I did, I just couldn't see him. All of a sudden, I'm looking at him and I can see him. He begins to tell me what he told my sister about how he killed himself on our front porch and what his name is. He said he didn't want to hurt us, but that every now and then he appears to check on the house and the people living inside. He said he's not out to hurt anyone, but since his family owns the house still, and he likes to look out for them if they ever come to the house. In 1988, I worked as a security guard at a local Christian college. The first night on the job, I was told it was my responsibility to patrol the campus all night, make sure the main doors were locked, and to make sure that all the lights were off in the chapel and that it was locked by 11 p.m. Standard stuff. So I started walking around the campus, getting to know a few students, and just feeling everything out. When 11 o'clock came, I went to the chapel and went to the basement first. Getting to the bottom stairwell door, I realized that it won't open. I pushed on it 4 or 5 times, but the door seemed to be locked, so I go back up and out and go into the back door. The basement is all locked down, all the lights are out, and it's secure. I go over to that stairwell door, and it opens easily from the outside. I figure it's just how the door is made. I go back upstairs and go to the stage where the light switches are. I look up and I see what looks to be a kid in the balcony. I yell for him, but he doesn't answer. Oddly enough, when I get up there, I can't find him. I got a little creeped out, but I figured it was late and I'm just seeing shadows. I go back down, cut all the lights, and lock up the chapel. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I go out for the full campus rounds, just to check up on everything. Heading across the quad, I notice that the lights are on in the basement of the chapel as well as the front spotlight. I go to the basement back door and find it is still locked. I go in, cut the lights, and as soon as I do, I hear a long, loud bang in the stairwell. I run in there and up the stairs thinking I'm chasing someone, but there's no one anywhere. I go back down and leave the back door and lock it. As I walk around, I notice the spotlight is off. I check to see if it could be motion control, but it's not. Since it was my first night, I decided not to say anything, but the second night changed that. I again had weird experiences around the chapel, but on night 2, I also hear weird crying and sounds in the woods on the north side of campus. I saw 2 strange hooded teens down on the southwest side, near where the tennis courts are. I tried to get close to them, but it always seemed like they were constantly moving 20 or 30 yards away from me. The next shift I work, I decided to ask the guy who hired me about the weirdness. He said that one of the other guards would drop by and basically debrief me. The guard who showed up was a 300-pound man, pure muscle, Cherokee. He was a beast of a man. I told him everything, and he said, "Yep, that sounds about right." He then proceeded to tell me that everyone who worked there overnight had some experience. He said that the stairway doors do not lock, but that he himself had spent 40 minutes one night locked between floors. He told me that he had thrown all his weight against both doors, but they would not move, and that every time he tried, he would hear this crazy laughter. He said he had chased what he thought were teens through the downstairs hall just to watch them disappear. That another guard had walked into the chapel and stumbled into what looked like a sacrifice with occult symbols drawn on the stage and had chased people off in cloaks, only to find that all evidence had disappeared when he came back after trying to catch the cloaked figures. All the occult symbols were constantly being found on campus. Needless to say, I didn't stay there long. I was in a rented house around the age of 7 or 8, and I still remember it perfectly. I was in the basement alone, and I know because every step was loud and creaky. I was building a Lego war zone and having some fun, but I turned around to grab some more guys, and at that point, don't laugh or say fake because it really happened, although it sounds a bit stupid. A red object splats the wall next to my head at the speed of light. I mean, not literally, obviously. But I picked up the object and it was a fruit snack. Weird, I think to myself. When I turned around, the two lines of Lego guys facing each other were all facing me. I ran upstairs and couldn't stop shaking. That's what happened to me then with that entity, but there's still more. Now that I'm 14 or 15 years old, my mom finally told me about her experience because she's very superstitious, and she thought that talking about it gave it power. She described a humanoid animal under the stairs that hated adults. She never told anyone but her boyfriend at the time, only after he asked about the same creature. Right as they confirmed it was the same thing, she told me the power in our house, and only around it, seemed to go out. I know they sound fake, but that was my first paranormal experience, and I wouldn't lie because it's the first I remember and I won't forget it. Also, my mom saw the same thing, and when she confirmed it, I knew that I wasn't insane or hallucinating. I was at church today. It's an old, small chapel, mostly old people. I'm the only teenager there. I stopped going after I got sick, but I still pray every day. Now, after I got baptized, I go every Sunday. Today's lesson was about knowing the Word of God and following what He says. I was listening and flipping through my Bible when I heard something whisper in my ear, "Of God." I turned around and no one was there. I looked around and no one was talking. No one ever talks during the lesson. I go back to reading and then I hear it again. "Of God," with some other words that I couldn't quite make out. I looked towards my grandpa to see if anyone was saying anything, but no one was speaking. My grandpa heard it too, but no one else did. Like I said, there's a lot of older people that go to that church, so maybe it was just a past member attending a lesson. So I want to start off by saying I don't believe in ghosts myself. I grew up very superstitious, but once I grew into adulthood, I didn't think the paranormal explanations made sense. I'm still agnostic to the existence of spirits. Still, paranormal encounter stories excite me, and I love hearing them. I can suspend my disbelief. Anyway, when I was younger, I had a great aunt who was psychic. Not the typical kind that read your future or anything. She was a staunch Catholic and basically just knew stuff she had no way of knowing. She saw it as a gift from God. To give you an example, one time when my mom was pregnant with my older sister, she experienced some bleeding and went to the hospital. Only she and my dad knew that she was there, but not long after, she received a call from my aunt. "What's wrong with the baby?" she asked. There's no way that my aunt could have known that anything was wrong or that she was at the hospital. There are more examples of this, but that's the only one I can remember off the top of my head. Her daughters, my mom's cousins, thought they had a little bit of that gift too, though not as prominently. These relatives lived up in the Adirondacks, and every year during the summer we used to visit them. I guess when I was around 3, we planned another trip up there. But one morning, about a week before the trip, my mom woke up, opened her eyes, and for a split second saw a white figure at the foot of her bed. She thought it was weird, but said nothing, until it happened again, and every day for a week. Finally, she told my dad, who froze and said, "I have been seeing that too." Weirded out, they continued with the trip as planned. During a night around a campfire, they told my mom's cousin about it, and her immediate response was, Watch your children. Someone's telling you to watch your children. That spooked them, but they didn't know what to make of it. Sometime into the trip, we as a family went to the cemetery where my mom's mom was buried to visit graves. I remember none of this, but from what I'm told, I stood with my dad, who was a little ways away from my mom and sister. He was busy with something, and I asked where Mom was. "Over that hill," he told me, and pointed to a small hill in the cemetery. I saw the bigger hill and the road and followed. Eventually, my mom and dad met up again, both asking where I was. Panic set in. My mom suddenly remembered the fireside convo with her cousin. They didn't watch me, and I went missing in the Adirondacks. And they still haven't found me to this day. No, I'm just kidding. After a lot of panicking and searching, they did find me, sitting outside a gas station up the road crying my little eyes out because I'd gone over the wrong hill and gotten lost. Moral of this story, if you see spooky white figures in your room, don't let your toddlers wander around graveyards in the mountains, okay? Last night, I was having a mini existential crisis, and I really just needed some sort of reassurance, so I asked for a sign, mostly from my grandpa, who passed last year and has been contacting us in various ways since. About an hour and a half later, I woke up to our alarm system going off. Our security monitoring company reported that something in the northeast bedroom had triggered it. That's my bedroom. Our house is close to 5,000 square feet, and they were able to pinpoint the triggering event to my room. Nothing was different last night from any other night. The alarm does not go off randomly, ever, so I guess I asked for a sign, and I got one. This is a story of my father's that he recounted to me when he was on assignment in Mexico City with a few other judicial officers. One thing you should know, when my father was young, he wasn't really much for believing in the paranormal, but this incident certainly had him scratching his head. He was in the center of Mexico City, El Centro, when he and 3 friends happened to be walking by what looked like a beautiful European woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, dressed in what seemed to be traditional gypsy clothing. He met the eyes of the woman as she approached him and went to grab his hand. He was a little put off, but he let it happen. She asked him if she could give him a palm reading, and before my father said anything, she insisted that he didn't need to pay her. My dad was reluctant to accept, but his friends were egging him on to do it, so they gathered around and simply listened with amusement as she began to speak. She read his palm and told him things of his life that she otherwise would not have known. She spoke of his childhood, how he grew up without the love of his father, and how he craved the attention of his mother but never got it, how he cared for his siblings as a parent when he could barely take care of himself, how he lived a hard life on the streets. It was at this point that the giggles and amusement turned to interest and attention, as they looked at my dad to elaborate on any of this or to confirm that it was true. He couldn't muster the words through his confusion, when the woman went on once more as my father listened in disbelief to say something quite interesting. She said he could never be harmed by black magic, voodoo, or anything else, that bad energies and entities were warded off by his presence because of his venas cruzadas, crossed veins. She said that he would live a long and good life because he walked hand in hand in the grace of God. See, my father had never been the religious type because of how hard his upbringing was, so this was strange to him. She asked, "Have you ever seen a ghost or a demon?" And my father said no. He had only ever heard of such things from others, but of course this doesn't prove anything. She finishes with my dad and does his friend, to which she doesn't have much interesting to say. She begins wishing them a good afternoon and was ready to leave when my father offered her some money, but she kindly refused. Instead, she insisted that they go around the corner and get the 2 other friends' readings from a member of her family, as they too were like her. They were headed that way, so they said sure, why not? So they turn the corner and see some woman dressed in similar clothing as the one who gave my dad a reading. And before they could say anything, one of the women goes, "Who are the two that didn't get a reading?" My father thought it was a little weird that she knew two of them already had gotten a reading. She did his friends, and one of them, who was nicknamed Tokyo, got a bad reading. She told him his life would be cut off shorter than what he expected and to cherish what life he had left. They went on with their day, assuming it was amusing but creepy. That was until a year and a half later, when Tokyo had died in a shootout, and that's when my father remembered the gypsy woman and what she had said. That was the day that he really started to believe in things like that. How else would she have known? I don't know much more about Venas Cruzadas apart from my father's experience. I don't know that I want to. Okay, so just a bit of preface. I live in a pretty normal-sized house with a big backyard. I have 2 windows in my room, one facing the driveway and the other facing the backyard. I live right across the street from a cemetery where I enjoy taking walks. Also, we have a security system set up at our front door, back door, and porch. So the other day, I was staying up late to work on a school project. It was about 1 a.m. when I thought I heard some rustling from outside my window. Thinking that it was just some animal, I got out of bed and walked to my window. I couldn't make anything out at first, so I stared into the darkness for a few minutes before my eyes landed on something. The best way I could describe it was a tall shadow. It was standing next to our old sandbox and staring forward at our back door. I thought it was a burglar trying to scope out our house, so I grabbed my phone and checked our security cameras to see if it detected anything, but there was nothing there. Being naturally freaked out, I decided to close my window and warn my parents. I tried to be as quiet as possible, but my window creaked, and whatever that thing was looked up at me. We made eye contact, if you could call it that, since this thing didn't have eyes, and I quickly closed the window before running to my parents' room. I told them that someone was in our yard, and my dad checked the cameras. If it was a burglar, the cameras would have caught them making a run for it, or caught them trying to get in another way. They didn't catch anything. My parents told me that it was probably just an animal, and I went back to bed, feeling unsure and spooked. But wouldn't we have seen an animal as well? The first time that this happened to me was a few years ago. I've had depression for a very long time, and that night I was about to commit suicide. I was crying in my bed, writing a goodbye letter, when something, or someone, gently touched my face. I didn't see anything. There was nothing there, but it felt warm. It felt like someone was drying my tears with their hand. For years I thought I imagined it, but last night it happened again. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little drunk, but it felt exactly the same. I was laying on the sofa, crying because of a stupid movie I was watching, and again something touched me gently, this time on my forehead. I was so shocked I didn't sleep at all. Is it possible that something or someone is watching over me? Both times that it happened I was crying. I'm an atheist, so it's hard for me to believe it, but I kinda hope it's true. The day before yesterday, I was visiting my girlfriend's place for the night. We talked for a while and then watched some movies, and then we fell asleep. I was really tired due to traveling and all that, and I didn't even realize I'd fallen asleep. Suddenly, I felt something on my chest. I was awake now. I tried to move, but I wasn't able to. I tried to shout out, but I realized my voice wasn't coming out of my throat. When I tried to open my eyes, I saw someone on my chest staring at me. It was a black figure with deep red eyes. Finally, I was able to shout in a mumbling way which woke up my girlfriend. I've known about sleep paralysis, but this was something new. Does anybody know what this was? Or what it wants with me? Hey guys, welcome back. We've survived yet another journey together. I hope you guys enjoyed these stories. I like some of the ones that inject a little bit of humor, so I liked the one at the end where the guy said, "And I'm still missing." So hopefully you guys like that too. I think sometimes it helps to cut the fear a little, or at least the monotony, depending on how you see it. So that's that. I'm sorry again that I haven't had a video in a couple of days. One reason is exciting, but I can't tell you about it yet. I had sort of a surprise project land in my lap, so I recorded those. And then the other reason is pretty mundane. I had some fillings done at the dentist. And what I thought was going to be pretty routine, I thought I'd be able to record the next morning. The Novocaine wouldn't set, so I had to get several shots of Novocaine, and when my dentist was trying to get the Novocaine in, she really hit a nerve, literally. So I couldn't move my mouth appropriately or really talk that well for a couple of days. So yeah, recording would not have been attractive. So that's why I've been gone. I'm sorry about that. But I hope I made up for it with a much longer video. I do want to try to do some of these longer ones. I know that my videos have been running about 30 to 50 minutes, somewhere in there, except for the original ones, which are a little shorter. But I am trying to up the length on some of these, because I know I like to really be able to put a video on in the background and listen to stories for a long time without having to worry about switching it out every hour. So I will try to do that. Also, I will put a poll, if I can figure it out. I'll put a poll in this video and up in the cards, and you guys can tell me what you want to see next. I have some Black-Eyed Kid stories, I have some Bigfoot stories, and I think I have some Time Glitch and Let's Not Meet stories as well. So I will put a little poll, and you guys can vote on that. Let me know what you want to see. I very much look forward to getting a community tab where I can put these things, but for the time being, it's Instagram and polls in the card. So I do start looking at the cards at the end of my videos from here on out, because I think that's what I'm going to start doing. I may not always get the results back in time to make it the next video, but whatever you vote on will be forthcoming in the next several videos after that, if that makes sense.